and around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we should be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is the wonderful Belinda DeLucy, former politician and rights activist. And here's what's coming up on the show. As the government is accused of blackmail and intimidation to pressure rebel MPs, claims that have been denied by Number 10, is it time to drain the swamp? Liz Truss has described a quagmire if Russia invades Ukraine, while US Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned of a critical moment amid Putin's threats. As tensions threaten to boil over, will the West's war of words with the Kremlin have any impact whatsoever? And we will not be silenced, say a group of peers after facing criticism for speaking over housing trans prisoners in women's jails. We'll be talking to one of them. Well, that's what we're talking about today, but what do you need to talk about? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or of course, you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Downing Street has warned Moscow will be punished with a package of sweeping measures if its troops enter Ukraine. It comes after the US and Russia held urgent talks in Geneva to ease tensions. Moscow has made a series of demands and is waiting for a written response. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's up to Russia to decide whether diplomacy or conflict prevails.
So that's the choice that Russia faces now. It can choose the path of diplomacy that can lead to peace and security, or the path that will lead only to conflict, severe consequences, and international condemnation. The United States and our allies and partners in Europe stand ready to meet Russia on either path, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine.
Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss called on Russia to desist and step back from Ukraine. Speaking in Australia, she said an invasion would lead to a terrible quagmire and loss of life.
They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilise others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake.
The Business Secretary has told GB News claims of blackmail by Conservative whips over the distribution of public funds are ridiculous. Kwasi Kwarteng's comments follow reports that rebels are threatening to publish secret text messages and recordings from the Prime Minister's supporters. Boris Johnson says he's seen no evidence to support the claims.
All public spending goes through proper process. There's a proper official paper trail, if you like. There's a proper procedure through which public finance, taxpayers' money ultimately is allocated. So any idea that the Whip's office have this in their gift, I think should be challenged immediately. And clearly, if these allegations are true, that's a very, very serious allegation, and I'd want to see them properly investigated.
More than 300 people have been rescued by the Italian Coast Guard off the island of Lampedusa. 2 patrol vessels saved the migrants who were crowded on a 15-metre boat around 20 miles from the coast. The Coast Guard says the boat was carrying an excessive number of people and could have capsized if they hadn't intervened. Babes in the Wood killer Russell Bishop, who murdered 2 schoolgirls in the 1980s, has died of cancer. The 55-year-old was jailed for a minimum of 36 years in 2018 for killing Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway in Brighton in 1986. He was cleared of their murders in 87, but while serving a life sentence for the attempted murder of a 3rd child, he was ordered to face a fresh trial under the double jeopardy law. Hospital patients in Norwich will be moved to a hotel in a bid to free up beds and ease pressure on the NHS. Up to 15 patients will receive care at a city centre hotel as part of a 3-month pilot scheme. COVID patients will not be involved. The NHS Norfolk Clinical Commissioning Group says the area's health and care system remains critical. Tributes are being paid to US singer Meat Loaf, who has died aged 74. A career which spanned 6 decades saw him sell over 100 million albums with hits such as I'd Do Anything for Love and Bat Out of Hell. He also starred in 65 movies, including The Rocky Horror Picture Show and Wayne's World. And staying with music, Adele has apologised to fans for postponing the start of her Las Vegas residency because the show isn't ready. The singer says her production team tried everything to pull it together in time, but delivery delays and COVID made it impossible. The show was due to open today and run most Fridays and Saturdays until April. In a social media post, she apologised to fans who've travelled to see her. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as and when it happens, but now back to We Need to Talk About with Alex.
It was November 2019. I was stopped in the corridors of the European Parliament by a fellow MEP. A list had been drawn up by Tory HQ, he informed me, called Men and Measures. A list of bribes designed to force high-profile Brexit Party candidates from standing in the forthcoming snap election. On that list were allegedly peerages and positions. Do not go anywhere near that, I warned him. It could actually be criminal. Days later, a campaign on an industrial scale of interference in the Brexit Party's selection process became clear. Having prepared to field a full quotient of candidates, they were suddenly dropping like flies. Phone calls from CCHQ to anybody planning to stand on a Brexit Party ticket, with reports of offers of council seats, contracts, all sorts of post-election trinkets in exchange for not running. The sort of operation that would make President Erdogan of Turkey blush. Now, if that sounds exaggerated, later the Daily Mail printed a list of Brexit Party candidates in Tory marginal seats with their personal contact details, urging readers to harass them into stepping down. An extreme tactic that frankly wouldn't look out of place emanating from the Kremlin. So as details emerge about CCHQ blackmail, what do I believe? Well, frankly, I imagine what has squidged out to the press so far is just the tip of the iceberg. Are the Tories capable of big-time bullying, bribing and briefings? Ha! Perhaps it's time to dredge the swamp. Today, we really need to talk about blackmail? Well, we're joined now by former Downing Street advisor and political commentator Sean Worth. Sean, I have seen personally how the Tory party has behaved during the 2019 election. It horrified me, it shocked me, it made a mockery of democracy in this country. Is that something that you've witnessed the Conservative Party do before?
I know that traditionally the Whips have used very strong-arm tactics, actually. I haven't seen the issues you've talked about, but you've had personal experience of them, clearly. So, I don't doubt that at all. The allegations right now are that the Whips, and these are, just for sake of viewers, the Whips are characters in parties and in government where they're there to try and discipline MPs to follow the government's line, essentially. And the reason for that is that MPs are ultimately accountable not to the Prime Minister or the party, but first and foremost to their electorates. So there's sort of historically there's been this whip operation, so-called, to try and enforce discipline. Now, clearly, some of that activity and behaviour crosses a line. I mean, traditionally they used to physically intimidate people, and there's stories going way back of people getting pushed up against a wall with a fist in their face, telling them to do things. Thankfully, that sort of stuff doesn't happen anymore. But certainly, there's strong-arm tactics. But any sense of blackmail or intimidation or corruption, as the allegations, clearly crosses a line that needs to be rooted out, definitely.
If these text messages, emails are leaked into the public domain, and it does show a paper trail of advisors to the Prime Minister or people in Number 10 or people at CCHQ essentially saying we're going to close a school in your constituency, or we're going to cut funding to this, or, oh, if you do this, we're going to give you that. Is that actually crossing a legal line?
Well, first of all, I think it would be very stupid, just from experience, for anybody trying to put pressure on somebody to put anything down in writing in today's social media age. You text somebody, that could appear on Twitter literally 10 seconds later. So I'm surprised that the person instigating these allegations, a chap called William Ragg, who's a senior Conservative MP, he says that there are indeed those pieces of evidence. I'm surprised at that, and I would be surprised if they come out, because if Whips are as intelligent as they should be, they wouldn't do that kind of thing. It would be much more private and discreet than that.
But that suggests to me, Sean, if there was a hesitancy about putting these things in writing, that suggests to me that these things should not be happening. And what I want to know is, at what point is the law being broken? At what point are parliamentary standards being broken? At what point is essentially democracy being undermined by these practices to prop up an ailing Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, I think certainly parliamentary rules will be broken. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know about criminal law. But certainly, if you're using blackmail, then that is a legal issue. I mean, in the past, there used to be issues of Whips keeping tabs on your personal behaviour and conduct, and there would be MPs having affairs, for example, with a secretary, and then they'd threaten to release information to the wife, and I mean all that sort of stuff. As I say, my view is that that's all in the past, all that kind of behaviour, and today it's much more sort of strong-arm tactics of phoning up and just really pushing the line that, look, if you want promotion and you want progression in your job, then you need to be supportive of us as we've been supportive of you. It's a kind of loyalty trade-off. And I certainly haven't got any personal experience of seeing or hearing MP friends of mine that have had sort of blackmail put to them. So again, if that kind of stuff if there's evidence of that, I'd be surprised. But if it does emerge, then it does definitely need to be passed to the authorities.
A scandal a day at the moment, isn't it? Sean, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insight from the time you had advising Number 10. And, well, let's see what happens. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Let's bring in my studio guest now, Belinda DeLucy. I mean, what's your take on this? My feeling is, if this was a normal workplace, right, if GBNews said to me, if you don't do this, that and the other, if you whistleblow, then we're going to take you off air. I mean, that would be a major HR issue. That's an employment tribunal, right? Yeah. So how are these sorts of practices? And everyone's watched House of Cards, and anyone involved in politics politics knows that it can be a messy business. But it does raise some huge moral questions about the nature of the people currently in government.
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure it's just a Tory phenomenon. I think it goes through past decades for all parties. The nature of whips are to discipline, to intimidate softly, to try and get coordination of votes. You know, it's quite hard, especially with Boris's government. You've got MPs from the Red Wall, with MPs like from Tunbridge Wells. They obviously have different priorities with their constituents. And how do you bring them onto the same page? Well, yes, it may take some tit for tat, and we can give you this if you vote for this. And that's how it's always worked. It doesn't mean to say it is right. So it's a bit like the expenses scandal. You know, when that was exposed, the MPs were sort of like, but that's how it's always been. And it just took that exposure for the public to go, oh, this is horrendous, it needs to change. And maybe it's time for that. Also, times are changing in terms of sort of trial by Twitter for MPs if they vote a certain way. In the 1990s, for example, you know, MPs and the way they voted really wasn't scrutinised very much. So they could get away with voting for certain policies without being held to account too much by their constituents because it just wasn't known. Whereas now, every single thing an MP does can be put on Twitter, can be recorded, so they could be a bit more hesitant and nervous about obeying whips, which is where the conflict comes. I think it's much harder to be a whip these days. But I do think it needs revisited, and we need to change the way we encourage MPs to unite behind the Prime Minister, but also to make sure they reflect their constituents first.
Now, you were in the European Parliament with me. You know, we fought shoulder to shoulder during that really tumultuous and messy Brexit period. And my very firm belief was the Conservative Party were deploying tactics that, frankly, wouldn't be out of place in a tyrannical regime. You know, it's almost on the scale of intimidation, bribery. You know, when you're at the point of promising tidbits to people because you control the levers of power in office, I mean, that to me is horrific and should never take place. But is your take the same? Are you as angry with them as I am?
No, I'm not at all. I think we have to be careful not to infantilise people, because remember, if you're threatened or bribed, you know, we're grown-ups. We can say no, and I will report you. You know, we're not all sort of victims of a terrible wave of blackmailers in Westminster. We're all grown-ups, and during the 2019 election that you talked about, I wasn't surprised at all that the Tories were panicking and used encouraging methods on the phone and in other ways. I don't think it's right what the Daily Mail did, reporting the contact details. I think they should have been really held to account for that.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a normal part of politics. We were very close to getting a Corbyn government. That panicked a lot of Brexit Party members too. I spoke to a lot of Brexit Party PCs that were agreed with the Tories and thought they should step down because the risk of losing Brexit entirely was real. So I do think we should just take it on the chin a little bit. Where there's been blackmail that crosses over the line, yes, investigations need to take place, but it is not the drama I believe it's being made out to be. I think it is pretty standard and normal way of behaviour when parties are panicking. And yes, the great thing about this country is it's always in the press and we always call them out when it happens.
I wish all of it was always in the press, Belinda, I do. Really good, actually, for us to disagree on something for once. That never happens. Well, there we are. I want to know what your views are on this. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, if you've got an operation coming out of CCHQ or Number 10, offering tidbits to MPs to back Boris or threatening to remove things from them or their constituencies if they don't. Is that OK? Is that just all part of the game? Or do you think, well, hey, why should my local library be shut down because my MP is doing the decent thing and being a whistleblower? Does that not make you a passenger in this filthy, tawdry game of politics? You can also tweet me, of course, at GBNews, and I will then figure out what you, the nation, really thinks on this one. Now, you're with GB News on TV and, of course, DAB Radio. Time for a short break now and a little check on the weather forecast. I'll be back in a mo.
Hello. A sparkling day of sunshine for some today, a rather drab day for others, but all of us are going to be dry pretty much. High pressure is in control. That's why the weather's so dry at the moment. This high will stick around for most of us through the weekend as well. But it's just slipping a little further south, which is allowing the breeze to come around the top and bring more cloud into Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, Western England and Western Scotland. Still largely sunny across southern England, eastern Scotland, having blue skies for much of the rest of today. But some cloud will drift towards the east and further south across the Midlands. And the odd spot of drizzle is possible over hills, but for most it's dry and fine. Temperatures a touch below average, so still feeling quite chilly, but probably feeling a little warmer in the east because that cold wind from yesterday has gone. Still quite breezy though across the far north of Scotland. That breeze bringing more cloud tonight and some drizzly conditions at times over the Highlands and the Western Isles. Elsewhere it's a dry night. It won't be as cold because there will be more cloud. There will still be some pockets of frost across the south and the east, but generally temperatures staying above freezing, certainly in most urban areas. Into the weekend, and it's a bright start across parts of southeast England, the east coast of England, but generally a lot of cloud, and that'll be the case on Sunday as well. There will be some rain at times across the Highlands and the Western Isles, perhaps easing off in the far northwest. It will stay quite breezy here, but here also the highest temperatures, we could reach double figures, maybe up to 12 Celsius on the Murray coastline, and generally cloudy further south, but a touch milder than Friday, 8 or 9 Celsius. And we will see some sunshine at times. There will be some breaks in the cloud, and that will continue on Saturday evening. Again, where we have breaks in the cloud, we could see some pockets of frost. And again, for Sunday, there will be some patchy rain across the northwest, but otherwise largely dry. Most places cloudy. Best of any sunny spells will be across parts of the east. Goodbye.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the rabid lobbying of so-called trans activists took a rather sinister turn yesterday when the Lord's Standards Commissioner was accused of stripping 300 years of parliamentary privilege, which allows members to enjoy full freedom of speech in chamber, by dismissing complaints from 4 peers in a debate about trans prisoners. The unprecedented and frankly deeply concerning move is being regarded as an attempt to silence those defending single-sex spaces following a campaign from an increasingly forceful trans activists. The 4 members have now written to the watchdog and have pledged to not be silenced over the issue of whether a man who claims to be a woman can be housed with some of the country's most vulnerable females in women's prison. How on earth did we get to the point that those wanting to protect women's rights and women's spaces are being so aggressively censored in a manner that would make the Taliban proud? Well, We're joined now by one of the peers, Baroness Catherine Mayer. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Catherine. You vowed to really stand your ground on this issue. Explain to me what happened.
Well, we received a letter which took us aback quite a lot, because basically, apparently, a member of the public complained that we debated this quite important issue, and there was no bad words, nothing, but I think it's just the fact that we used the wording transgender women. So there was a complaint, and instead of the commissioner taking away the complaint by saying this is freedom of speech, parliamentary privilege, what is said inside Parliament is protected, he actually only dismissed this complaint on a technicality. So we were all rather taken aback, because it transforms everything. If what I say in Parliament is going to be criticized only because some people disagree with my views, this is the end of democracy. And I have to tell you, I mean, my mother is of Russian origin, and her family escaped the Bolsheviks. And I went to the Soviet Union when I was a child. And I saw firsthand what it is not to have a democratic debate, not to have a parliament where, as in our parliament, what is wonderful is you have the party in power, but you also have the opposition. And it's the whole idea of democracy, is to have the two sides which represent also the public, because the public, not everybody has the same view. So we have to be able to discuss things, to try and convince each other. Maybe my view is better than yours, but we need the debate. And if we stop debating, we are actually in danger of stopping a democratic system, which has been around for hundreds of years. But then there is also the issue of women.
Yeah, I mean, look, sticking with what actually happened in Parliament, why is it, do you think, that when it comes to this argument, when women stand up and say, it's not appropriate, or I don't believe it's appropriate for a man who asserts that he's a woman to have access to what are women's only spaces, on the grounds of the safety of the women reliant on those spaces, why is it that this particular argument seems to attract an almost chilling level of fascism, where people are just shut down, they're called TERFs, their comments were raised from parliamentary records? I mean, how have we got here?
I have no idea. It's madness. I mean, it originally comes from the States, and it's a culture that came, it's like a cult. And there is sort of one agenda. You're allowed to say certain words. You're allowed to have a specific opinion. I mean, it's infiltrated our universities. I mean, you saw that quite a few months ago, Kathleen Stock had to resign from her university because she held the view, which is not a view. She actually said something which is logical and biological. A woman is a woman. And a person who changes sex is a person who changed sex, but they were not born women. I mean, this is a fact of life. This is biology. But somewhere there is a new culture that came in, and people call it the cancelling culture. And it even infiltrated, universities, in schools, and now it seems in Parliament. And there is one line, and you are allowed to say one thing, but you're not allowed to say something which is different, even though it is facts. So we have ideology that takes over facts, and people are intimidated, and it's actually quite scary. I have to say, it is scary.
Yeah, I find it harrowing. I find it really harrowing and distressing and deeply dangerous for women. So thank you so much, Baroness Catherine Mayer, for being there to fight the fight on behalf of vulnerable women, because, don't let them silence you. I'm with you all the way. Baroness Catherine Mayer there, who's a Conservative peer. Now, well, Belinda, what do you think on this issue?
Oh, my goodness. Why are the alarm bells not going off up and down the country? This is becoming an incredibly sinister movement, the pretty harmless trans community from 10, 20 years ago who just wanted to get on with their lives have been hijacked by, in my opinion, gender extremists, gender ideologists who have no interest in equal rights. They want special rights. They want to own women's rights. They are driven now by this belief the only way they can get what they want is by erasing women as a sex group. And they've been allowed to infiltrate the highest echelons of our power houses. And as a woman, I get in fact, even I say as a woman, men are on our side as well. I don't know any dad, brother or son who wants their daughters and sisters and mothers to have their right of refusing males in their safe spaces taken away from them. Who wants that? I think there needs to be an investigation as to how it's got so far into our House of Lords, where free speech is now under attack. And if you look throughout history, look at the movements that have depended and demanded on censorship, on compelled speech, on threatening livelihoods of people if they speak out. These are not the good guys. This is I find it a very dangerous and frightening movement because it relies on terrifying women into staying silent so they can say, oh, yes, women, they all support men self-IDing into women's spaces. No, we don't. It's just people are too scared to speak up. And a young girl came to me recently. She was only about 23. And she said, can you please speak up for the young? Because young women cannot afford to be cancelled. So we don't speak out against self-ID. We don't speak out about gender extremism because our careers are at risk. So it's up to you older ladies to take the baton on. But I repeat, it is not the genuine small group of trans women who are often on our side with women's rights. These are gender extremists that have hijacked the community.
So what is the answer then when it comes to a trans prisoner, a man who might have committed a crime and then decides that they identify as a woman, or perhaps they identify as a woman when they commit the crime? It doesn't really matter about the chronology of it. But where do you put them then?
Right. Well, very easy. In a man's prison, because male prisoners should be together. Now, it's very clear that this movement is incredibly sexist because it never, ever looks to men to solve the issues of trans-identifying males. So they never say to men, you have to be more welcoming to males who want to dress effeminately or wear their hair long or makeup in your areas. And they never say to male prisons, create a block for trans-identifying males so they are kept safe and protected from violent offenders. The burden is always put on women. Women must take the burden for male-on-male violence. Women must take the burden for males needing to feel validated. But we're talking about criminals. A lot of these men who want to suddenly become women in prison are sex offenders, and they are being considered for a process where they can be moved into a women's prison. This is twisted. It is almost a crime against women what is happening, and I cannot believe under Boris Johnson's government that we are facing a situation where we have male prisons and unisex prisons, male sport and unisex sport. The female categories are protections that our female biology requires. The very few it requires are now being deemed a hate crime. We are now being demonised as TERFs and bigots when we speak out, and it is an absolute crime against women. And anyone who drives this ideology needs to be called out. We've got to unite and get behind this.
Blimey. Tough stuff, Belinda.
Yeah.
Well,
so angry about it. I cannot believe it's got this. I cannot believe I've just listened to a member of the House of Lords frightened. And all the people are standing up, men and women are standing up, cheering it on. What are they doing? This is madness.
Yeah. Well, no, it is madness indeed. What do you think? Is it madness? Well, of course, I want to know what you think. Email me gbviews@gbnews or tweet us @gbnews. Lots of fiery debates going on today. So if you've got your 2-bit, why not throw it in? You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, we will be talking to a cervical cancer survivor as data reveals screening levels have dropped to the lowest level in a decade. That will mean a lot of deaths, sadly. Now, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rhiannon.
It's 2:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Downing Street has warned Moscow will be punished by the UK and its allies if it pushes ahead with destabilising action in Ukraine. The US Secretary of State has been holding talks with Russia's foreign minister in Switzerland to avert a conflict. Antony Blinken says both sides now have a better understanding of each other's positions. The Business Secretary has told GB News claims of blackmail by Conservative whips over the distribution of public funds are ridiculous. Kwasi Kwarteng's comments follow reports that rebels are threatening to published secret text messages and recordings from the Prime Minister's supporters. More than 300 people crowded onto a 15-metre boat have been rescued by the Italian Coast Guard off the island of Lampedusa. The Coast Guard says the vessel could have capsized if they hadn't intervened. Tributes are being paid to US singer Meat Loaf, who has died aged 74. His career spanned 6 decades and saw him sell over 100 million albums, with hits such as I'd Do Anything for Love and Bat Out of Hell. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. More at the top of the hour.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Smear tests. Hardly the most edifying of experiences. To some women, deeply uncomfortable, even traumatising, but essential in the prevention of cervical cancer. In England, women between 25 and 49 are called up every 3 years, dropping to every 5 years thereafter. Yet recent research has shown that during the pandemic, only 7 in 10 women went to get tested, meaning thousands of undiagnosed cancers that will come with a tragic death toll. Well, joining us to discuss this is cervical cancer survivor Olivia Parry. Olivia, what an amazing story you have. I mean, if you can talk about it a little bit now and what happened to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had my smear test. I had no idea there was anything wrong with me. I received a letter and it asked for a follow-up. So I went along to the hospital and they do a procedure known as a colposcopy, where they put a camera up to have a closer look. And immediately I knew something was wrong because the nurse said, "Oh my God," and then tried to change the subject. I'd looked at the camera. I didn't really know what it all was. You know, the nurses are highly trained. So I was ushered into an adjoining room and a doctor came to speak to me and I was just in a state of shock. I mean, this just came out from the blue. I'd always prided myself on being very healthy and fit. And then they said, well, you need to have a biopsy tomorrow morning at 7:30. So again, I had no time to process it. And I went into the treatment centre the next day at 7:30. And I actually woke up 5 days later in intensive care, being told I was lucky to be alive. So there was a complication, but, you know, nevertheless, I'd gone for my screening. And it was a gift because I had no idea.
And had you always been going for regular screening, or had there been a gap before?
No. I'd always gone for them. Not a problem.
So really, if you had missed that,
absolutely,
you wouldn't be here.
Yeah. So mine was stage 1B, so that meant it hadn't spread, but still, it was about 6 centimetres, so it could have spread had I not gone to that screening.
And how alarmed are you at these latest statistics that actually attendance to cervical smear tests are the lowest that they've been in a decade?
I think it's absolutely shocking. We are so lucky in this country to have these screenings available to us. I mean, I've lived overseas, I've lived in third world countries, and it's just not available. You know, we need to be talking about it, encouraging it. You know, it might be slightly uncomfortable and embarrassing to talk about, but it could save your life.
And, I mean, you've campaigned on this for a long time now. What are the reasons, you know, if you come across the main reasons why women don't go to these, when they get the letter, when they get the text message and the doctor says?
Time, lack of time, or they just put it off. You know, it's not really high up on my priority list, not very uncomfortable, I'd rather not know, denial, lots of different reasons.
Well, I mean, I just want to say as well, for anyone out there who is possibly supposed to be going to have a smear test, and if you're like me, they terrify me. I hate them. I have panic attacks. I've been a victim of assault, and I really despise having my smear test. And what I did is I took this woman, Belinda DeLucy, with me to the surgery to support me in that journey. So I would say if you are worried...
Yes, take a friend.
Take a friend, because it can be, for some women, it can be, if you've gone through forms of trauma, it can be incredibly uncomfortable and upsetting.
I mean, health is just so important. We take it for granted most of the time until something like that, a shocking diagnosis, comes out of the blue. And it's much easier to stay ahead of your health than then have, you know, a catastrophe like that and then try and come back for it. I mean, I had, obviously I was diagnosed with the cancer, I had all the treatment, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, then I developed chronic pain. So, you know, it took me a while to get back on my feet, but I'm just so passionate about health, and I really want to encourage people to see their health as a priority. So
yeah, I mean, Belinda, are you a regular user of the service? And you've got 4 daughters. Will you be cracking the whip and saying to them when they get to 25, get this done?
Well, I do feel that responsibility. You know, my 4 girls are all teenagers now, and I make a really big point of me going and taking the 5 minutes to go and do it. And I've said to them, when it's their time to go and do it, you know how girls go off to the loo together sometimes, you know, go with friends, have, you know, the local friends that they have often belong to the same doctor's surgeries. You know, if there's an afternoon that you can have one after the other or go in with each other, if it's about that. But it can save lives. It does save life. After that, I don't know if you remember the harrowing sort of reality story of Jade
It was about the same time as my diagnosis.
Did that encourage you to go, or you were going
No,
anyway,
I'd already been.
Because she really affected...
She highlighted
it.
Did. But another thing, when I was in hospital and I'd come round and I was in the ward, there was actually a girl who was in there, a bit younger than me, and she didn't make it. She didn't make it through the surgery. And I still remember the nurse sobbing when she was packing away her things. And then when I was having my treatment, there was another girl, only 29 actually, and she didn't make it either.
I mean, by and large, I think cervical cancer is rather asymptomatic, isn't it? Until the point of, you know, too late. So.
And the thing is, the virus that causes it, HPV, it's just so common. For most people, it gets cleared up on its own. There is the vaccine now, but you still need to go for screenings, even if you've had the vaccine.
Well, that's what I wanted to say, actually, because all my daughters are going through the vaccine now. They're in that age group, and it's the word vaccine seems now, you know, as a cure, but actually it's just protection, and people do still need to keep an eye out. And girls, if you've got friends who don't go, encourage them to go. It's, you know, sisters for sisters. We've got to get this protection out there for our young, because as you said, these young girls who may not be in the know or may not get round to it, you know, are losing their lives still.
Yeah. Exactly.
Olivia, Belinda, thank you so much. If that's you, if you think that you might be overdue your smear test, or if you've had the letter, if you've had a text message reminder, pick up your phone, do it now. Go on, make sure, go book that appointment, because you never know, you might really need it. Well, you've been sending your emails in throughout the show today about Tory bribery. That's what kicked off today's programme with. And Scott says this nudging by whips has always gone on and always will, unless proportional representation is introduced, which would hopefully result in a more honest kind of politics and a more representative one too. Jennifer says parties behave in this manner and always have. Well, I couldn't agree more. I'm sure that's true, but should they continue to? Anthony says MPs should grow up and vote as they feel and ignore the whips or change their mind and support the government. If they worked for a company, they would be fired for going public against their boss. Janine says, if there's evidence of blackmail, then show it and name names. Just saying these things and then not providing evidence is just as bad as blackmail in my book. Well, yeah, I want to know if these text messages and emails exist, get them in the public domain. Don't just say, oh, they might exist and squirrel them away. If you really think that it's wrong, go on, let them out. Well, you're still with We Need to Talk About and GB News, and I'm Alex Phillips. And finally, Liz Truss seems to have remembered she's Foreign Secretary in the nick of time as fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine escalate, and has warned of a terrible quagmire as the result of a Russian-backed conflict. Her contribution to the ongoing war of words between the West and Russia, made on the other side of the planet, is hardly going to get Putin quaking in his boots, especially as America seems to have no answer other than some paltry threats about sanctions. But Vlad has noticed Britain has been sending weaponry to the beleaguered state, while the EU has an unedifying scrap with itself on how to manage the Russian threat, while Germany has been gassed for their gas, exposing the uncomfortable proximity, some might say, of the bloc to the Kremlin and inability to forge any meaningful or coherent foreign policy, despite worryingly trying to usurp NATO's role on the world stage. With Chinese President Xi Jinping watching from the sidelines to assess perhaps how much of a pushover the West is in the light of his own territorial ambitions over Taiwan, the next few months could prove to be a seminal moment in the realignment of the geopolitical axis of power. Well, here's what Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said earlier on today.
The Kremlin haven't learnt the lessons of history. They dream of recreating the Soviet Union or a kind of greater Russia, carving up territory based on ethnicity and language. They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilize others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by retired Royal Navy Admiral Lord Alan West and Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Taras Kuzio. Now, Lord West, let's start with you. Yesterday, I spoke to guests and they said, well, you know, perhaps this is just Putin saber-rattling and there isn't really a clear and apparent threat to Ukraine. What's your position? Should we be very nervous right now?
I think we should be extremely worried because I think it's getting more and more likely that something will happen. And I know that Biden referred to incursions as being different from invasion. They're not. They're both invasion, and the Americans then had to make their position clear about it. If you go back some months ago, I'd have thought there was lurking there a possibility of the Russians doing something down at about 5%. I think we're up now at a sort of about 50-50 of whether they will do something stupid in Ukraine. So we should be very concerned.
Now I'm going to move on to you, Dr. Kuzio. Do you think that this sort of war of words taking place is enough? I mean, Vladimir Putin's amassed a load of troops along the border. He's not going to sit there and think, oh, well, you know, Liz Truss and Anthony Blinken say don't do it, so I'm not going to, is he? It's not going to make a blind bit of difference.
Well, no, but I think you're very fair on how you caricatured the European Union, but I think a bit unfair about Britain. Britain has supplied the largest amount of weapons to Ukraine of any Western country, and Defence Minister Ben Wallace has written recently some incredibly good essays about how he understands why there's this crisis. So I think the British government is pretty much on board. I think that we're not there yet for a full-scale invasion. Ukraine is a very big geographic country. It has the third largest army in Europe, 260,000 people. And that would require something in the region of 3 times more for an invading force. By the end of January, Russia should have about 175, 200,000 troops. That's still not enough for a full-scale invasion. It's enough for smaller scale invasions, of course, in eastern and southern Ukraine, but I don't think we're there yet for a full-scale invasion. Putin is a bully boy. He wants to use this to apply pressure and to get his ultimatums that he's been given to the West to be answered. And that's the reason for this military.
I mean, going on that theme, I'm going to come back to you, Lord West. Putin is a bully boy, but he gets away with it, doesn't he? I mean, the precedent was set when he marched into Crimea and said, this is now Russia. And basically, the international community sort of tutted and went, oh, you shouldn't have done that. But there was no material pushback, particularly. So, you know, frankly, it seems as though he can get away with it again. Does it worry you that if he does, whatever scale, if he crosses that border and everyone sort of sits there and goes, well, a few economic sanctions, and he shrugs his shoulders, it does set another dangerous precedent, doesn't it, when it comes to, like I was saying in my introduction, that the axis of power geopolitically in the world?
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a backlog of incompetence in handling the situation right back from when the Crimea was invaded, I'm afraid. And there's no doubt that Putin, he's a revisionist. He has stated quite clearly one of the worst days in his life was when the Soviet Union collapsed. He wants to effectively create an old order with spheres of influence. He thinks that the West is rather weak, and I have to say, because we haven't got our act together and focused, we are showing ourselves to be rather weak. It is quite appalling, I think, the way that the European community is not acting as one bloc. Its constituent parts are acting in very different ways, and the behaviour of Germany, I think, is appalling. That flights to Ukraine from us should have to avoid German airspace because they can't be bothered going through all the rigmarole of getting approval to go through there is a dreadful message. The fact that the Germans are so tied to Russia for gas, and indeed as are several other countries in Eastern Europe, the sorts of threats that would worry Putin are as if there was a statement that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline will just not be used at all by Germany if something like this happens. And really, they haven't put their foot down hard. It is the message that's being given to Putin is we're all in disarray and not acting in a concerted fashion. I mean, the Americans, let's say Biden made his extraordinary comment about invasion or just an incursion, which was an extraordinary comment to make. That has been clarified, but it's not good. NATO really hasn't cohesively really pulled on this. I mean, it has been handled badly for many years, this whole saga, Crimea, the Donbass, and we really need to act in a focused way with all the countries involved, because that is the only way we'll put pressure on Putin. And if we don't do that, you're quite right, he'll do this and then think, oh, maybe I can do something else. And the danger there is Ukraine isn't in NATO, but if he tries something like this on the Baltic states, the bottom line is we should then go to war with him because they are NATO members. And no one wants, indeed, I raised this on the floor of the House some weeks ago and said that I felt the greatest risk to mankind is not actually global warming, but is actually a thermonuclear war. And the government front bench said, yes, we think it would be unfortunate if there's a nuclear war. I find that slightly extraordinary myself. And, you know, this is a real risk if things go wrong and NATO starts being attacked by Russia. And you're quite right. If Putin gets away with things, he might try other things.
So, yeah, going back to you, Dr. Kuzio, I mean, there have been some noises allegedly coming out of Berlin that they might sort of row back from perhaps appeasing the Kremlin a little bit, especially when it comes to Nord Stream 2. Is that going to be enough? I mean, what does need to happen to make Putin think, oh, gosh, maybe I should retreat from some of my aggressions?
Well, there needs to be an upping of the type of sanctions that are in place. I mean, if you compare it to the sanctions against Iran, the sanctions against Russia after 2014 are something in the region of about 3 out of 10. The ones against Iran are about 7, 8 out of 10. So you need to get up to the Iranian level to be a serious contender in trying to change Putin's policies. I mean, and Nord Stream 2 has to be completely halted. I mean, that we used to hear when Donald Trump was US president that it's Trump that's creating divisions between transatlantic countries, between the US and Europe. Well, actually, Germany's promotion of Nord Stream 2 is the biggest divisive factor in Europe. All of its neighbors, including Britain and all the countries around Germany, are opposed to Nord Stream 2. And yet German nationalism has steamrolled this ahead and made itself completely reliant on Putin's gas. So that has to be ended. But the main area is what the British government is doing, and some other countries as well, the United States, Canada, Poland, potentially some others, and that is supplying weaponry to Ukraine. If you want Putin not to go ahead with some kind of invasion, whether it's major or limited, that will be stopped if Putin fears that Ukraine is sufficiently well defended. Ukraine has its own military-industrial complex. It makes its own weaponry. It also buys some weaponry, like Turkish drones, and also gets some Western military assistance. What it currently needs is offensive weaponry that can bring down Russian aircraft, because Russia has a preponderance and greater than Ukraine in the air. And that's what the West has been reluctant to provide until now, that kind of weaponry that could potentially offset that Russian advantage. And I think that's where we need to go. The last thing that we want is a hot war in Ukraine. And remember, Ukraine borders 4 NATO members. So it won't just stay in Ukraine. And if there's a war in Ukraine, there'll be in the region of 4 or 5 million refugees trying to get into Europe. So this is a major. One final thing, if I can say.
Okay, but very briefly, we really don't have any time, actually. I'm going to have to thank you and end it there, as we're going to be bumped off air. But Lord Alan West, who's a retired Royal Navy Admiral, thank you to you so much for coming on today. And Dr. Taras Kuzio, thank you to you as well, laying it on the line there about, well, quite how critical a situation we may be facing when it comes to Ukraine. You've been sending your emails in throughout the show about prisons as well. Josephine says, men in any form should not be in women's prisons. There you go, short and sweet. Dave says, why have those that have committed crimes have so many rights? Denise says, as always, only those who shout the loudest will be heard. Well, we need to start shouting louder. Yes, come on, Denise. It's utterly ridiculous that this is allowed to happen. I couldn't agree more. Whew, what a show we've had. That's all we've got time for, sadly. But join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News, same time, same place, next week, 2 o'clock, of course. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Arlene Foster. First, it's time for the weather forecast. It's goodbye from me and my wonderful guest of the day, Belinda DeLucy. I'll see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Hello. A sparkling day of sunshine for some today, a rather drab day for others, but all of us are going to be dry. Pretty much. High pressure is in control. That's why the weather's so dry at the moment. This high will stick around for most of us through the weekend as well. But it's just slipping a little further south, which is allowing the breeze to come around the top and bring more cloud into Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, Western England and Western Scotland. Still largely sunny across Southern England, Eastern Scotland, having blue skies for much of the rest of today. But some cloud will drift towards the east and further south across the Midlands. And the odd spot of drizzle is possible over hills, but for most it's dry and fine. Temperatures a touch below average, so still feeling quite chilly, but probably feeling a little warmer in the east because that cold wind from yesterday has gone. Still quite breezy though across the far north of Scotland. That breeze bringing more cloud tonight and some drizzly conditions at times over the Highlands and the Western Isles. Elsewhere it's a dry night. It won't be as cold because there will be more cloud. There will still be some pockets of frost across the south and the east, but generally temperatures staying above freezing, certainly in most urban areas. Into the weekend, and it's a bright start across parts of southeast England, the east coast of England, but generally a lot of cloud, and that'll be the case on Sunday as well. There will be some rain at times across the Highlands and the Western Isles, perhaps easing off in the far northwest. It will stay quite breezy here, but here also the highest temperatures, we could reach double figures, maybe up to 12 Celsius on the Murray coastline, and generally cloudy further south, but a touch milder than Friday, 8 or 9 Celsius. And we will see some sunshine at times. There will be some breaks in the cloud, and that will continue on Saturday evening. Again, where we have breaks in the cloud, we could see some pockets of frost. And again, for Sunday, there will be some patchy rain across the northwest, but otherwise largely dry, most places cloudy, Best of any sunny spells will be across parts of the east. Goodbye.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. As the Prime Minister plots his survival after a bruising week, we will ask a Conservative Minister on how the Prime Minister can salvage his premiership. Plus, in an attempt to win back voters, Boris Johnson has unleashed a playbook of populist policies, and we'll bring you all the details. And as tensions are skyrocketing between Russia and Ukraine, we will ask an Eastern European expert about the potential implications if there were to be an invasion. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 3:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Downing Street has warned Moscow will be punished with a package of sweeping measures if its troops enter Ukraine. It comes after the US and Russia held urgent talks in Geneva to ease tensions. The Kremlin has made a series of demands and is waiting for a written response. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's up to Russia to decide whether diplomacy or conflict prevails.
So that's the choice that Russia faces now. It can choose the path of diplomacy that can lead to peace and security, or the path that will lead only to conflict, severe consequences, and international condemnation. The United States and our allies and partners in Europe stand ready to meet Russia on either path, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine.
Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss called on Russia to desist and step back from Ukraine. Speaking in Australia, she said an invasion would lead to a terrible quagmire and loss of life.
They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilise others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake.
The Business Secretary has told GB News claims of blackmail by Conservative whips over distribution of public funds are ridiculous. Kwasi Kwarteng's comments follow reports that rebels are threatening to publish secret text messages